Samuel 31, 7 through 10. When the men of Israel on the other side of the valley, on the other side of Jordan, saw Israel's men had run away, and that Saul's sons were dead, they abandoned the cities and fled. So the Philistines came and settled in them. This kind of shows that we see in Scripture how if there's a king not following after God, the people oftentimes are not following after God. But if there's a leader that's following after God, then they follow after God. We see that here with them. The people weren't following with God as they should have been. Because if Saul was dead, then they should have trusted the Lord to keep them there. But instead they ran because of Saul's death. Which shows their dependence wasn't on the Lord, it was on Saul's leadership. And oftentimes, that's how our focus is. The one we can see. We see in Exodus how Moses goes up the mountain and they have to build a golden calf to worship. We see how their focus is on what they can see. Oftentimes it's hard to focus not on what we see, but the Lord. So the Philistines just came in and took the cities because they were abandoned. The Philistines didn't even have to fight for the cities there. They were just giving up. The next day when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his sons dead on Mount Gilboa. Now this doesn't mean that they didn't know Saul was dead, because they probably knew Saul and Saul's sons were dead. They just came across the bodies at this point. Which this also mirrors the 1 Chronicles 10, the same story. So we see that it was often the winner of the battle would go back and take the spoils of the war. That's why when the battle was often lost, they'd gather as much as they could when they left. But losing would take all that they could carry and leave, because everything else the victor would get. They cut off Saul's head and stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to spread the good news in the temples and their idols among the people. So they're telling people King Saul's dead. Israel, at this point, to their knowledge, Israel's kingless. When God brought David to be king prior to this, but as far as people, Israel's defeated. This is a big loss for Israel, but this was something God had planned. So it wasn't really a loss, it was for Israel, it was for David to make way as king. Then they put the armor in the temple of Asheroth, which is a Philistine fertility god, and hung his body in the wall of Bethshan. His skull, we see this in 1 Chronicles 10, his skull was placed in the temple of Dagon. So, so they kind of doing this as trophies. They're taking these as trophies for their defeat against Israel. They think they conquered Israel. They knocked Israel down to where it wouldn't matter. The fact is, Israel had a king, but Israel was ruled by God.